I think about like our kids. As they're growing up, they're still who they were when they were an infant. And it's just, as they're growing up and as they mature, a lot of their personality it comes out in different ways, but it's the same person, it's their same personality. In a lot of ways, Wellspring, as we are today, 18 years later from when we planted, it's the same church. Worship, formation, mission is the same thing that we were in day one. Worship, formation, mission. In 1998, I was in a missions class, and the professor said that the best way to see people come to Christ was through planting churches. So immediately, my imagination was engaged, and I thought, what would it be like for us to be able to plant a church? And so when I came home and talked to Jana about planting a church, she said,
"Sure, what?" Because I had never heard of church planting. Because this was something that was so strong for Billy, I felt like, yeah, let's do it.
And the more that we talked about it, the more that we prayed about it, we just knew that God was calling us to plant a church. So at that time, we began just to think about what would it look like to bring together a core team, people from around our community that also had a passion for reaching others for Christ.
I remember being at home and Jana Waters called, and we didn't really know each other. We'd met one time. She said, "Hi, this is Jana, and we're having this meeting in our backyard, and we just hope you'll come and just kind of hear about this church plant thing."
And I remember Rob coming home saying, "So Billy Waters asked me to help plant a church, an Anglican church." And so the thought of being part of a church plant was pretty extraordinary thought. I could tell Rob was super excited, and I was like, all right, let's do this.
When we started meeting with the people in our backyard, they were like good friends to us. And so it was an easy fit.
It was comfortable. There were a lot of people that we already knew, and it was kind of like, okay, this is who it's gonna be with, our team, and then I'm good with this.
So I do remember that first meeting in the backyard of the launch team. Jana was pregnant yet again, and we just sat around and Billy cast the vision for what Wellspring Church was going to be.
I remember the duplex being on a corner with a chain link fence and having people walk by. Wellspring's always been a place of welcoming whoever would stop by or walk by and not being ashamed of the gospel.
So the next step was preview services. So we met once a month on Sunday nights in the Fellowship Hall of Christ Episcopal Church. And along with us were our launch team and anyone who might be interested.
I remember setting up the chairs in Barnes Hall, probably about 30 to 35 of them, praying and hoping that we'd have people fill them. Because you just don't know. You set something out, you plan it, and you just pray that people show up.
Barnes Hall was just kind of a sweet time for us to start to figure this out without a lot of that external pressure.
I do remember the feeling of we are doing everything. The 10 or 15 of us, we're doing all the jobs and getting everything ready.
But then it seemed like every week somebody was bringing a friend, somebody was bringing an aunt or a cousin, and it just kept growing and growing.
I remember coming home after some of the services. We had this little routine. We'd order a Domino's pizza. We were so poor, but we'd order a pepperoni pizza and sit there in bed and eat it because we were like, oh, we're so tired. That was fun. Oh.
What was so interesting was the way God really just put our hearts on this and said, go and do this.
It was a small group of people who wanted to trust God and follow His leading, and that's what we did.
We stumbled upon this place. It was a fellowship hall of another church. And we knew we wanted to be in Englewood, and that was a place that became available.
And we started to learn about gentrification and the donut effect of when cities get gentrified, then people get pushed out. Right away in our DNA was a heart of compassion for those that were getting pushed aside.
Moving out of kind of our comfortable fellowship hall from the nest that we were growing up in to now we're out on our own and like, wow, this is, I guess we got to pay rent, and this is kind of grown up.
And so we were all so excited to have a space to call our own. It was shaped like a bowling alley.
Our nursery was also the office. So during the week, Billy and Rob would have their offices in their desks in there, and then we'd push everything to the side and pull out the toys during Sundays. Do you remember that?
Yes.
I mean, looking back in retrospect, it's ironic that where the altar was originally, that's what became the first food pantry.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
I mean, so when we reoriented, we moved the altar to the side. The base of worship became a place of service, and seeing how those two are aligned and are such a heart at the core of Wellspring.
There was one person who was on low-income housing who was also benefiting from the food pantry. And as she came and was receiving the food, she also was recognizing the people that are coming were also hungry. So she took whatever money that she had in her purse, which was like $5 or $10. She walked down to the King Soopers, bought a couple of packets of hot dogs. She did not have enough money to buy ketchup, mustard, or buns, but she bought 2 packets of hot dogs, brought them back to the church, cooked them up, and then just handed them out to the people that were coming through. And that really was the beginning of the well.
And that really, I think, brought cohesion between the established church members and the people that we were reaching, because we were breaking bread together.
So we hired a realtor. The realtor found us a church in Platt Park. It was a huge facility, and it was dirt cheap. And we told the realtor, we don't want the facility because it's in too nice of a location. We want to stay within Englewood. We don't want to move away from the city that God's called us to. We're going to stay here. And he said to find a church in Englewood according to your specs, that's like trying to find a needle in a haystack. And the very next day I get a call from the pastor who was at this church, and he said, are you guys looking for a facility to move into? And we said, yes.
One of the things I remember about coming into this space was just how big it was. We went from a basement to this high ceiling, just amazing space, and it did invoke praise and worship.
I have a very, very fond memory of the song and all God's children singing glory, glory, hallelujah, and people were out of their minds excited. It just felt so good to be in a proper church feeling space.
Wellspring Church was pretty much where it all started for me. Really in the sense of how a church is supposed to function, how a church is supposed to be, how a church is supposed to form you. It's God's instrument to reach his people on earth, and Wellspring Church is doing that.
The first word that came to mind was home. That it's our home and there are people here who will love us where we are.
So you know the funny little saying that you don't get to choose your family, but you get to choose your friends. Wellspring's my family that I choose.
Well, Wellspring to me is the first word that comes to mind is love. And maybe that's why God has chosen to grow us, is that love of God and love of neighbor. I mean, it's core. That's core to the call. That's core to everything we are. And that's embodied throughout this community.
It's kind of like a potluck, because when I cook, it'll be fine. But if we have a potluck, it's going to be delicious because everyone's going to bring their best little thing. And I just really see that as a strength of a church plant, is if we can set the table like we're going to do this, but then everybody bellies up and brings their best thing.
The joy of our lives is not pastoring Wellspring Church. The joy of our lives is being in the family of Wellspring Church. In a lot of ways, Wellspring, as we are today, 18 years later from when we planted, it's the same church. Worship, formation, mission is the same thing that we were in day one. Worship, formation, mission. And so as we launch into these next 5 years, these next 10 years, these next 20 years, just as God has been faithful in the past to accomplish everything that he has given us to do, so also we believe that God will be faithful in the future. And we can't wait to see what God will do.